Have you ever felt like your family keeps having the same arguments, right? Over and over again, right? And nothing changes. Tonight, I want to share what I feel, what I believe, what I know is an inspiring story about a real family, right? It's a real family that broke out of a painful cycle that had been keeping them trapped for years. So tonight, let's talk about a win, right? I want to talk about something that I hear from parents every week, right? I want to address this, right? They talk about, one of the hardest parts of having an adult child who feels stuck, who is stuck, isn't just that they're struggling, right? It's what it does to your hope. Parents will tell me things like this. I see this even in this group. I say, I don't know if this is ever going to change, right? I'm starting to wonder if this is just how life's going to be. Nothing's going to get better. Or they're even worried about what if it actually gets worse, right? After months and months, and for some families, years of trying different things that don't seem to work, I mean, it makes sense why they're having those thoughts. The other thing that I hear from people is they feel alone. They say, I feel so alone. I don't know anyone else who is going through this, right? They feel shame. They feel embarrassed. Everyone else's kids seem to be moving forward, and mine are just standing still. If that's where you are tonight, I want you to know two things. First, you are not alone, right? There are far more families that deal with this than most people realize, right? Because we keep it secret, we keep it private. We don't want to see where we're struggling. But that's one of the reasons why this group exists. It's a place to come together and know that you are not alone and that there are plenty of other people who are families that are in the same situation, right? And the second thing I want you to hear is there really is a reason to have hope, right? Not because every family changes overnight and not because every situation just has this like easy answer. I want you to have hope because I have the privilege, right? I get to watch families over and over and over who have been stuck for years. I get to see them move in a healthier direction. Basically, I get to watch them become unstuck. And I want to share one of those stories. Of course, I change details when I share a story just so that no one's privacy is compromised, right? But this is a real story, right? This is a real family. This family that I had the privilege of working with, right? They were stuck in the same pattern for years, right? Not months, years, right? It was a mom, a dad, and their adult son. They had some other children, but they were mostly doing fine. It was really mom, dad, and their oldest. Every few weeks, something would happen, right? Usually, it started with a deadline that came and went, right? Or something that their son promised to do that never actually happened or would happen, right? And then mom would jump in, right? She'd try everything she knew to encourage him, to motivate him, to help him move forward. But eventually, he wasn't moving forward. And then she'd have to let the dad know what was going on. Now, let me just say it right here. I absolutely believe this. I know this. This dad really did love his son. There's no question about that. But this was like a hardworking guy, and he was just always busy, and he was kind of on the outside, right? He didn't really get involved in this process. But of course, he wanted his son to succeed. He wanted his son to be a hard worker like he was. But he wasn't involved in these situations until they reached the breaking point. So the dad would finally find out what his son didn't do, and then the dad would come in hot, right? He would get angry. He would be very harsh. There would be lots of yelling. And then he would tell his son exactly what he needed to do. Sometimes these situations even got physical, right? These were These were not happy moments. These were almost traumatic, wounding moments in the worst of those situations that this family would experience. So then, what would happen then? Right? Dad comes in hot, trying to force change, and his son would shut down every single time. He would shut down. Then the mom would feel bad, right? Bad because of how that whole thing went down, and she would soften. She would become even more compassionate, and then she'd back away from the expectations, right? It was just too much. It wasn't worth the peace of the home, it wasn't worth the relationship. So she would back off those expectations. She couldn't see her son get hurt like that, right? Well, dad would see that, and then he would become more frustrated, and then the mom would become more protective, right? And all along, their son is feeling more hopeless. Nobody was moving forward, right? They were in a stuck cycle, right? A painfully stuck cycle. The biggest goal that everyone kept focusing in on, the thing they always wanted to talk about, was their son getting a job, right? Seemingly a simple plan: get a job, save some money, move into that apartment with his friend who already was saving money and had a full-time job, right? That was the plan, simple plan. Let's do this. All right. Well, here's where things were about to go through the cycle again, right? They were about to go through that same painful cycle for, I don't know, like the 539th time. Here's what happened. One day, they discovered something. Their son had actually been offered several interviews and he never went, right? Can you imagine how discouraged the parents were, right? I mean, they're begging for him to take action. He had submitted some applications, actually got job interviews, and didn't even show up. Right? This was another opportunity that didn't happen. But there's something I want all of you to hear tonight. These moments, as painful as they are, right, as much emotion as is involved in these moments are often opportunities. Not because they're enjoyable, not because they're easy, definitely not because they're easy, but because they're opportunities to step in and to step out of an old cycle, right? To create a healthier pattern. So let me explain this. I mean, just think about what was about to happen there, right? The son, he's not showing up for interviews. Dad was going to get angry. His son was going to shut down. Mom was going to rescue. Everyone would feel miserable and nothing would change. That was what was about to happen again. And yeah, and then a couple more weeks would go by until the cycle repeated itself. So instead, the dad and I had a different conversation. I jumped in and talked to him. I said, well, I asked him to consider something that I don't think he had really thought of before. I said, the problem isn't that your son doesn't have a job. He even said he needs a job, right? We all agree he needs a job. The problem is there's got to be something bigger than his desire to get a job. So instead of asking, why won't he just do it? Think about this. What is happening inside of him that is keeping him from doing it, keeping him from moving forward? So, what I was telling his dad was, I don't think your son just needs someone to tell him to get a job, right? That would have worked a long time ago, right? There's something more. He doesn't just need someone to tell him to get a job. I think he needs his father, right? His father who can be a mentor, his father who can be a guide, someone who could help him understand what was getting in the way and then help him work through it. I don't think this dad had ever really thought about his role that way. right? He thought he was helping by just pushing harder, right? But I could tell you this, right? I could tell you that the idea, or perhaps the fact, that his son needed and wanted his father to be a mentor, not just a drill sergeant, right? But a mentor, someone who cared and was there to help him. I could tell that that was opening this dad's eyes, right? He was seeing a different approach. And this is important, right? Because he took a different approach. So instead of starting with correction, he started with connection. Instead of beginning with his disappointment, he began with his curiosity. Instead of assuming laziness was to blame, right, he wanted to understand the struggle because his dad had finally realized anger wasn't going to solve anxiety. You can't yell someone out of anxiety. So they sat down and they talked. Not about why he was failing, not about why he was disappointing everybody, right? They talked about interviews. They talked about fear. They talked about rejection. And eventually his son admitted something. He wasn't avoiding interviews because he didn't want a job. He was terrified of rejection. Right? He had gone to interviews before. He had been there, right? And he hadn't got the jobs. So his confidence had become so low and his anxiety so high that he wasn't sure that he could actually emotionally handle failing again, right? Getting rejected again. So now the dad understood what was going on, what was really going on. Right? Now, the dad did not lower the expectation. He didn't say, oh, well, okay, so don't worry about getting a job. I know you're anxious. We'll just forget about this. No, he did not say that. Instead, he became a guide, right? A guide helps you move forward, a guide shows you the way. And this was a cool point of connection. I was there, right? The dad started talking about his first interviews, right? How nervous he was, how intimidated he felt, how he wondered if anyone was ever going to hire him. So he normalized the anxiety. He didn't minimize it. Then he said something amazing. I was right there, right? I saw this. He said, "It's okay if you don't get this job. I haven't gotten every job I interviewed for either. I'm proud of you for trying. And if you keep trying, I know you'll get a job." How amazing was that? Right? I watched this. It was like almost immediately in that conversation. I mean, the conversation just felt different. His son wasn't defensive. He wasn't shutting down. He wasn't bristling. He was listening. And then he actually started asking questions. Right? The dad wasn't forcing the conversation anymore. It was going both ways. His son had actually joined the conversation. They were talking. Questions were being asked and answered, stories were being told and connected with, right? It was really cool. Though I want to point out something important here because I think this is really important. The expectations never changed, right? He still needed a job. He still needed to save money. He still needed to move towards independence. That never changed. What changed was the dad's approach. Connection came first, then guidance, then accountability. Connection, guidance, accountability. Not connection instead of accountability. Connection made the accountability possible, right? They were connected. They felt like they had each other's back, like they really cared about each other. The dad felt appreciated more and more that he had a role and that his son was connecting. It was good. So, what happened? What happened from there? All right. Honestly, I was a little surprised by this as well, right? How quickly things started moving at this point, right? His son went to that interview, and I thought he was going to be too anxious, too nervous, but he got that job. And then a few months later, he got promoted. Now, it was not a big promotion, but it was a promotion. More importantly, what I saw was this kid, this adult child, he started believing in himself again, right? When he was talking about the job and how he was getting promoted and how people were liking him and he was getting acknowledged at the work, I could see just that self-esteem growing. He was believing in himself again. And I really wish I could tell you more about that story, right? Like how he's doing. But the truth is, we've actually had a hard time connecting and making appointments because he's working, right? He's working a lot and he happens to be working when I'm working, right? So, from my perspective, missing counseling sessions because you're doing exactly what you need to be doing is absolutely okay. Fine by me, right? He's moving forward. But, big but here, right? Does that mean life is perfect? Happily ever after? No, that's not this story. Of course not. I promise you, this kid is still going to struggle. He is going to experience anxiety. He is going to face some obstacle that is going to spike his anxiety and his insecurities, and it's going to be a challenge. But what I feel so much better about is his family knows that they don't have to follow that same cycle, right? This dad knows that he can do something different than he did before. When anxiety shows up, his first job is not to become louder. His first job is to become a guide, is to connect, right? Is to help. So I know that this is not everybody's story. I know that some of you are dealing with addiction. Some of you are dealing with severe mental illness. Some of you with trauma. Some just situations that are more complicated, maybe far more complicated. I'm not suggesting that this exact approach fits every family, like how this family did it, this story that I was sharing with you. The reason I shared it is because it's real, right? I watched a family that was trapped in this painful cycle for years, and then they started moving in a different direction. And it wasn't because they lowered expectations. It's not because some massive thing changed, like a lightning bolt came in and just changed life. No. And it certainly wasn't because they rescued more, they became tougher. It's because they learned how to connect first, guide, and then push forward. So if you're feeling discouraged as you're listening to this, if you're wondering whether your family can ever get out of the cycle you've been living in, I want you to know there is a reason to have hope, right? So keep asking questions in this group. Keep learning, keep encouraging each other because families really do get out of these painful cycles. I see it all the time.